Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating piece of source material that unpacks one of the most remarkable narratives in ancient texts, 1 Kings, chapter 17. Now, it's incredibly easy to look at this strictly as ancient history, right? Just some old story from a distant time about a prophet named Elijah. But as our source material reveals, this chapter is actually a profound spiritual map. It's literally a detailed step-by-step guide for navigating times of severe lack, deep uncertainty, and spiritual drought.
So I want to ask you, when the brook of your life dries up, where exactly is God? We've all been there. A sudden job loss, a relationship breakdown, or just an unexpected crisis. It is incredibly easy to feel utterly abandoned during these hard times. We often panic and wonder if God has just walked away from us. But I promise you, the insights we're about to uncover from this text are going to completely shift your perspective on how you view those dry seasons.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to take a chronological journey today. First, breaking idol myths. Then we'll look at hiding in trust at Cherith. After that, we'll see what happens when the brook dries up, followed by the double grace at Zarephath, a really pivotal moment with a widow's son, and finally, eternal preparation. Let's get started.
All right, Section 1, Environment-Breaking Idol Myths.
The story kicks off during a super dark, difficult era in ancient Israel under King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. Basically, the entire nation has plunged into worshiping foreign idols, and the land is hit with this devastating, crippling drought. But here is the fascinating part. God didn't immediately fix the environment. Instead, he started preparing his servant, Elijah. And this brilliantly illustrates that the drought wasn't just some random natural disaster, it was a highly targeted theological statement. Look at the contrast here. On one side, we have Baal, who the Canaanites worshiped specifically as the god of rain, crops, and harvest. On the other side, Yahweh, the true God. By literally shutting up the heavens, God was showing the people that he, not Baal, actually commands the weather and the earth. We often think that if God loves us, he should instantly solve our problems. But God often uses our environment to turn our eyes away from our false idols.
This source material connects this beautifully to Deuteronomy 8:3, which says, "He humbled you, causing you to hunger and then feeding you with manna, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord." This speaks directly to us today. God allowing difficulties isn't a punishment. It's a deliberate dismantling of our false idols and our wrong dependencies. He strips away what we falsely rely on, just so we can learn to rely completely on him.
Moving right along to Section 2, Cherith, Hiding in Trust.
Before God uses Elijah in this massive public showdown against 850 false prophets on Mount Carmel, he gives him a really strange command. He tells him to go hide by the Brook Cherith. God has to hide and shape his servant in absolute isolation before he can use him publicly. And at Cherith, Elijah gets a masterclass on daily trust. Think of it as the world's first and definitely strangest food delivery app. Ravens bring bread in the morning, ravens bring meat in the evening, the brook provides water. But notice what's missing here. A pantry? A stockpile? God didn't give Elijah a year's supply of food all at once. He provided daily, shaping a servant who perfectly understood what it means to rely on our daily bread, living one literal day at a time in total dependence.
But how God provides is honestly just as shocking as when he provides. He commands ravens to feed Elijah. Now, under the law, ravens were considered unclean birds, and by nature they are scavengers. They're greedy, they do not share food, yet God uses them. God's provision is never restricted by human logic or our earthly limitations. He can use unclean birds, foreign widows, strangers, literally anyone. We must never put God in a box regarding how he's going to deliver our rescue.
Which brings us to Section 3, Brook Dries, A New Start.
So the crucial point is right here. The narrative takes this dramatic, heart-stopping pivot. After all this miraculous provision, the unthinkable happens. The water stops flowing. The brook dries up. Which begs the question, the brook dried up, does it mean God left? Are you staring at a dried up brook in your own life right now? A lost job? Maybe a closing door? A lot of people mistakenly believe that when circumstances go bad, it means they've sinned or God just abandoned them. But the brook didn't dry up because Elijah failed. It dried up because it was time to move. We really need to reframe this scary ending. It's actually just God gently saying, "Child, it's time for the next stop."
You see, God's leading frequently happens in phases. Phase 1 was Cherith, Phase 2 is Zarephath, Phase 3 is the ultimate victory at Mount Carmel. If Elijah had stubbornly pitched a tent next to that dry riverbed in Phase 1, just clinging to the past, he would have completely missed out on the spectacular miracles waiting in the next phases. A closed door is often just the hallway to your next miracle. We have to be willing to move with God's leading.
And that perfectly transitions us to Section 4, Zarephath, Double Grace.
Now, what's really interesting about this, and it's arguably the most touching part of the entire story, is this massive contrast. God tells Elijah to go to Zarephath where a widow is going to feed him. Now, logically, you'd expect God to send him to a wealthy merchant or a rich king with vast storehouses, right? But instead, he sends him to a destitute, starving widow. Look at the profound contrast between human reality and God's reality. Looking at the widow's inventory, she's only got a handful of flour and a little oil. She literally tells Elijah she is gathering sticks to cook one final meal for her and her son, and then they're going to die. But look at God's provision. God brings Elijah, who needs food, to a widow who needs faith. He pairs two people who are entirely lacking in resources together so that both can experience this daily, renewing miracle where the jars never empty. It's grace for both of them.
The absolute core takeaway from Zarephath is simple. Grace is renewed daily. God didn't fill up the widow's flour bin all at once so she'd have enough for a year. Just like at the brook, the provision was daily. The flour and oil lasted just enough for that day, and the next morning there was just enough again. His mercies truly are new every morning, perfectly paced to build our daily trust in Him.
Section 5, Widow's Son, Lord of Life.
Just when things seem to be going so well, the tone shifts dramatically. Suddenly, the widow's son falls ill and stops breathing. He dies. This is such a confusing, heartbreaking challenge. Why would God perform a daily miracle to keep them from starving, only to let the boy die of sickness? It pushes the widow and Elijah to the absolute brink. But remember, miracles aren't the end goal. The true purpose is knowing God deeper. Elijah takes the boy, cries out to God, and God miraculously raises the boy from the dead. This is actually the first recorded resurrection in the Bible. Why did this happen? It elevated the widow's faith. She went from seeing God as merely a cosmic food provider who keeps her flour jar full to acknowledging Him as the absolute Lord of life and death. Her faith was profoundly deepened.
Which brings us to our final section, eternal prep, beyond needs. Let's move to and see how this builds into 4 actionable spiritual principles of God's marvelous preparation. We've journeyed through a drought, a hidden brook, a raven's delivery, an endless jar of flour, and a resurrection. Principle number 1, God prepares before the need arises. Before Elijah ever felt hungry, God had already commanded the ravens. Number 2, provision exceeds human imagination. Ravens, endless oil, raising the dead, never limit God to your own resources. Number 3, preparation requires the response of faith. The widow had to bake the bread first before the miracle happened. She had to step out. And number 4, the greatest provision is God Himself. He doesn't just want you to rely on the flour and oil. He wants you to rely on the provider.
Our source text powerfully connects this Old Testament narrative to the New Testament. Romans 8:32 puts it perfectly. He who did not spare His own Son, but gave Him up for us all, how will He not also, along with Him, graciously give us all things? You see, God's ultimate preparation for humanity wasn't flour, it wasn't oil, and it definitely wasn't ravens. It was giving us His Son, Jesus Christ. If He has already handled our greatest eternal need, we can be absolutely certain He's going to handle our daily earthly needs.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to ponder today. If God has already provided His Son, giving the most precious gift imaginable, can you trust Him with the dried-up brooks in your life right now? God's preparation is never late, and it is always working, even before you can see it. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Stay curious, stay encouraged, and I'll see you next time as we dive into another fascinating topic.